Chapter 21 of Adeline Mowbray by Amelia Opie. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pam Moscato. Chapter 21. Adeline awoke early the next morning perfectly sane, though weakened by the exertions which she had experienced the night before, and saw with surprise and alarm that she was not in her own lodging. But she had scarcely convinced herself that she was awake when Mrs Selby, the mistress of the house, appeared at her bedside, and seeing what was passing in her mind by her countenance, explained to her as delicately as she could the situation in which she had been brought there. " And who brought me hither ?" replied Adeline, dreadfully agitated, as the remembrance of what had passed by degrees burst upon her. " Colonel Mordaunt of the Life Guards," was the answer, and Adeline was shocked to find that he was the person to whom she was under so essential an obligation. She then hastily arose, being eager to return home, and in a short time she was ready to enter the drawing room, and to express her thanks to Colonel Mordaunt. But in vain did she insist on going home directly, to ease the fears of her family. The physician, who arrived at the moment, forbade her going out without having first taken both medicine and refreshment ; and by the time that, after the most earnest entreaties, she obtained leave to depart, she recollected that as her clothes were the same, she might still impart disease to her child, and therefore must on no account think of returning to Editha. " Whither then can I go ?" cried she, forgetting she was not alone. " Why not stay here ?" said the Colonel, who had been purposely left alone with her. " O dearest of women, that you would not accept the protection of a man who adores you, who has long loved you, who has been so fortunate as to rescue you from a situation of misery and danger, and the study of whose life it shall be to make you happy." He uttered this with such volubility that Adeline could not find an opportunity to interrupt him ; but when he concluded, she calmly replied, " I am willing to believe, Colonel Mordaunt, from a conversation which I once had with you, that you are not aware of the extent of the insult which you are now offering to me. You probably do not know that I have been for years a married woman." Colonel Mordaunt started and turned pale at this intelligence, and in a faltering voice replied that he was, indeed, a stranger to her present situation ; for that, libertine as he confessed himself to be, he had never yet allowed himself to address the wife of another. This speech restored him immediately to the confidence of Adeline. " Then I hope," cried she, holding out her hand to him, which in spite of his virtue he passionately kissed, " that, as a friend, you will have the kindness to procure me a coach to take me to the lodging a few miles out of town, where I once was before ; and that you will be so good as to drive directly to my lodgings, and let my poor maid know what has become of me. I dread to think," added she bursting into tears, " of the agony that my unaccountable absence must have occasioned her." The Colonel, too seriously attached to Adeline to know yet what he wished, or what he hoped on this discovery of her situation, promised to obey her, provided she would allow him to call on her now and then ; and Adeline was too full of gratitude to him for the service which he had rendered her, to have resolution enough to deny his request. He then called a coach for himself and for Adeline, as she insisted on his going immediately to her lodgings, and also begged that he would tell the mulatto to send for advice, and prepare her little girl for inoculation directly. Adeline drove directly to her old lodgings in the country, where she was most gladly received, and the Colonel went to deliver his commission to the mulatto. He found her in strong hysterics, the tawny boy crying over her, and the woman of the house holding her down on the bed by force, while little Editha had been conveyed to a neighbor's house, that she might not hear the screams which had surprised and terrified her. Colonel Mordaunt had opened the door, and was witnessing this distressing scene, before any was conscious of his presence ; but the tawny boy soon discovered him, and crying out, " O sir, do you bring us news of our friend ?" sprang to him and hung almost breathless on his arm. Savanna, who was conscious enough to know what passed, though too much weakened from her own sufferings and anxieties to be able to struggle with this new affliction, started up on hearing these words, and screamed out, " Does she live ? Blessed man, but say so, dat's all," in a tone so affecting, and with an expression of agonized curiosity so overwhelming to the feelings, that Colonel Mordaunt, whose spirits were not very high, was so choked that he could not immediately answer her. and when at last he faltered out, " She lives and is quite well," the frantic joy of the mulatto overcame him still more. She jumped about his neck, she hugged the tawny boy, and her delight was as extravagant as her grief had been ; till exhausted and silent she sunk upon the bed, and was unable for some minutes to listen quietly to the story which Colonel Mordaunt came to relate. When she was composed enough to listen to it, she did not long remain so ; for as soon as she heard that Colonel Mordaunt had met Adeline in her frenzy, and conveyed her to a place of safety, she fell at his feet, embraced his knees, and making the tawny boy kneel down by her, invoked the blessing of God on him so fervently and so eloquently that Colonel Mordaunt wept like a child, and exclaiming, " Upon my soul, my good woman, I cannot bear this," was forced to run out of the house to recover his emotion. When he returned, Savanna said, " Well, now, blessed sir, take me to my dear lady." " Indeed," replied he, " I must not ; you are forbidden to see her." " Forbidden !" replied she, her eyes flashing fire ;" and who dare to keep Savanna from her own misses ? I will see her." " Not if she forbids it, Savanna ; and if her child's life should be endangered by it ?"" Oh no, to be sure not," cried the tawny boy, who doted upon Editha, and having fetched her back from the next house, was lulling her to sleep in his arms. Colonel Mordaunt started at the sight of the child, and stooping down to kiss its rosy cheek, sighed deeply as he turned away again. " Well," cried Savanna, " you talk very strange ; me no understand." " But you shall, my excellent creature," replied the Colonel, " immediately." He then entered on a full explanation to Savanna, who had no sooner heard that her mistress feared she had been so much exposed to the infection of the small pox as to make her certain of giving it to her child, than she exclaimed, " Oh my good God, save and protect her own self ! She never have it, and she may get it and die." " Surely you must be mistaken," replied the Colonel ;" Mrs Berrendale must have recollected and mentioned her own danger if this be the case." " She !" hastily replied the mulatto, " she tink of herself, never ; she only mind others good. Do you tink, if she be one selfish beast like her husband, Savanna love her so dear ? No, Mr Colonel, me know her ; and me know though we may save the child, we may lose the mother." Here she began to weep bitterly ; while the Colonel, more in love than ever with Adeline from these proofs of her goodness, resolved to lose no time in urging her to undergo herself the operation which she desired for Editha. Then, begging the mulatto to send for a surgeon directly, in spite of the tears of the tawny boy, who thought it cruel to run the risk of spoiling Miss Editha's pretty face, he took his leave, saying to himself, " What a heart has this Adeline ! How capable of feeling affection ! for no one can inspire it who is not able to feel it ; and this creature is thrown away on a man undeserving her, it seems." On this intelligence he continued to muse till he arrived at Adeline's lodgings, to whom he communicated all that had passed, and from whom he learned, with great anxiety, that it was but too true that she had never had the small pox, and that, therefore, she should probably show symptoms of the disease in a few days. Consequently, as she considered it too late for her to be inoculated, she should do all that now remained to be done for her security by low living and good air. That same evening Colonel Mordaunt returned to Savanna, in hopes of learning from her further particulars respecting Adeline's husband, as he felt that his conscience would not be much hurt by inducing Adeline to leave the protection of a man who was unworthy of possessing her. Fortunately for his wishes, he could not wish to hear, more than Savanna wished to tell, everything relating to her adored lady ; and Colonel Mordaunt heard with generous indignation of the perfidious conduct of Berrendale, vowing at the same time, that his time, his interest, and his fortune should all be devoted to bring such a villain to justice, and to secure to the injured Editha her rightful inheritance. The mulatto was in raptures. She told Colonel Mordaunt that he was a charming man, and infinitely handsomer than Berrendale, though she must own he was very good to look at ; and she wished with all her soul that Colonel Mordaunt was married to her lady, for then she believed she would have never known sorrow, but been as happy as the day was long. Colonel Mordaunt could not hear this without a secret pang. " Had I followed," he said mentally, " the dictates of my heart when I saw Adeline at Bath, I might now, perhaps, instead of being a forlorn, unattached being, have been a happy husband and father." And Adeline, instead of having been the mistress of one man, and the disowned wife of another, might have been happy and beloved, and as respectable in the eyes of the world as she is now in those of her grateful mulatto. However, there was some hope left for him yet. Adeline, he thought, was not a woman likely to be over scrupulous in her ideas, and might very naturally think herself at liberty to accept the protection of a lover, when, from no fault of hers, she had lost that of her husband. It is natural to suppose that while elevated with these hopes he did not fail to be very constant in his visits to Adeline, and that at length, more led by passion than policy, he abruptly, at the end of 10 days, informed Adeline that he knew her situation, and that he trusted that she would allow him to hope that in due time his love, which had been proof against time, absence, and disdain, would meet with reward ; and that on his settling a handsome income on her and her child for their joint lives, she would allow him to endeavor to make her as happy as she, and she only, could make him. To this proposal, which was in form of a letter, Colonel Mordaunt did not receive an immediate answer, nor was it at first likely that he should ever receive an answer to it at all, as Adeline was at the moment of its arrival confined to her bed, according to her expectations, with the disease which she had been but too fearfully imbibing, while the half distracted mulatto was forced to give up to others the care of the sickening Editha, to watch over the delirious and unconscious Adeline. But the tawny boy's generous benefactress gave him leave to remain at Adeline's lodgings, in order to calm the fears for Editha, and assist in amusing and keeping her quiet ; and if attention had any share in preserving the life and beauty of Editha, it was to the affectionate tawny boy that she owed them ; and he was soon rewarded for all his care and anxiety by seeing his little charge able to play about as usual. Colonel Mordaunt and the mulatto meanwhile did not obtain so speedy a termination to their anxieties. Adeline's recovery was for a long time a matter of doubt, and her weakness so great, after the crisis of the disorder was past, that none ventured to pronounce her even then out of danger. But at length she was in a great measure restored to health, and able to determine what line of conduct it was necessary for her to pursue. To return an answer to Colonel Mordaunt's proposal was certainly her first business ; but as she felt that the situation in which he had once known her made his offer less affronting than it would have been under other circumstances, she resolved to speak to him on the subject with gentleness, not severity ; especially as during her illness, to amuse the anxiety that had preyed upon him, he had taken every possible step to procure evidence of the marriage, and gave into Savanna's hands, the first day that he was permitted to see her, an attested certificate of it. CHAPTER XXII. Recording by Pam Muscato.